Welcome to Certain Point of View, your first step into a much nerdier world. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on iTunes. Just go to certainpov.com. Thanks. And now your hosts, Ben Milton and Addy Thomas.
Hey, Nerferders, I'm Addy Thomas.
And I am Ben Milton again.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for already pointing out as we were starting to re-record this episode that I just messed up and didn't record the last 15 minutes. Maybe we'll release that as an exclusive to Patreon.
Oh, that would be great. This is what it could have been. If this whole podcast goes to shit now, then we can like, this is how good it started. Before Ben started drinking.
Right. So today we're talking about the Force, the nature of it, the Jedi. Force, life breeds it, makes it grow. Its energy surrounds us and it binds us. And of course, there's the Gray Jedi where,
they just make shit
they just do whatever they want.
Yeah, they don't care.
They're like Honey Badger.
Oh, that's maybe
Qui-Gon is like Honey Badger.
I like it.
I like it. So we're going to be talking about the nature of the Force, the Gray Jedi Order. What is it? Does it have room in the new Star Wars universe? And we're going to talk about that. But before we get there, we'll talk about a couple other things that's going on right now. Don't forget, you can go to our website, certainpov.com. Check out everything from weight loss, Civil War. We'll be posting recipes, supplements, and stuff. Just so you know, we do sell the supplements. It is a profit for us. Just a disclaimer there. But we'll post some of that stuff up there. If you want to follow along, if you want to join us and have fun along with us, we've been making it a lot of fun and a lot of trash talk. So it's been a good time, which is a rare thing for me to say about any sort of weight loss process. So you can check that out. It's on our website, certainpov.com. All our social media is there, including our new email list. You were saying in our first version, in our first take of this episode, that it's a good way to just kind of keep an eye on what episodes are coming up, because we understand there are a couple of you guys that listen to every episode, and you are rare, and we love you, even though you might have some things to work through if you're listening to us that often. And I say that in love.
God bless you. God bless you.
Looking at you, Renee. Too many. But you can, but it makes sense if there's only certain episodes that you want to check out, like the D20 Star Wars episodes, or a certain movie review or TV show that you actually watch, or
another pass.
Exactly. So all of that we're going to be putting in that email list, so you can check that out. Makes it easy to share with other people. Makes it easy to follow what's just happening in the realm of a certain point of view, so that you don't have to depend on Facebook just showing you what might be interesting to you. So again, that's all at our website, certainpov.com. So the nature of the Force, the Gray Jedi. So this all started with an article that we read on 1138.com. You sent it to me, and it was an interesting, just sort of an interesting perspective on the Force and the Gray Jedi, that do we really have room for the Gray Jedi? It seemed like this author, Sarah Dempster, who's part of the Tashi Station network of podcasts and blogs and all of that for Star Wars, she was not quite a fan of it, and she puts out a very compelling case for why it doesn't fit with Star Wars, especially with the form it is in right now. And I'll kind of give my best recap of that article. And this discussion is this Gray Jedi thing has kind of existed in some form with Star Wars fans for a long time. Like, I think that in a sense it's even kind of lived on since like right after Return of the Jedi, but it's kind of expanded a little bit in Legends, and then it's really coming up back again with the new Star Wars expanded universe, with a lot of the different Force orders that have been established, from everything from Rebels to Clone Wars to the comics to some of the novels, with the Bendu, the Night Sisters, all these different, the Inquisitors, all these different Force orders that are showing up really kind of lead like, okay, there are different interpretations of the Force. It's not just the Jedi and the Sith. And so what added fuel to this discussion and has made it a little bit more prominent is the Last Jedi teaser at the very end, when you have Luke saying, well, the Jedi must end. And so sort of the easy interpretation of that is, well, he's lost faith in who he was, and he'll come back, and Rey will be the next one to pass on to take on the torch for the light side versus the dark. So that's definitely seems the most likely
obvious
scenario.
way. Yeah.
But I also think, so Rian Johnson's also really kind of talked up the whole idea of like, there's going to be a little bit of a game changer in this movie. So my thought, and I'm not dead set attached to this, but I could see that the Gray Jedi could be something that comes out of this, like a new sort of interpretation of the Force, like going back to the original intent of what the Jedi were supposed to be. You know, something that we kind of like always talk about, like just on a spirituality level, like really looking at sort of the original intent and original form of Christianity, like how much of it is diluted in different cultures, like Westernism, Westernization, Protestantism, you know, just being an American and individualism has changed it so much. Interpretations, different translations have changed it so much. So, you know, that it's a really kind of interesting thing to really explore, like, well, what if the Jedi Order kind of went through that sort of transition as well, where, you know, you're interpreting a document from thousands of years ago that really only had relevance to a very particular culture. What if, like,
how do you interpret that? How do you make that work, you know, 1,000 years later?
Exactly. And I think that's where, you know, the room for the Gray Jedi has really kind of emerged with a lot of, like, sort of that postmodern, like, moral relativism, I think is where that discussion has really come back up. So her idea, though, is that as Star Wars exists right now, it's really grounded. I said grooted. Grooted. It's Guardians of the Galaxy still on the brain.
So excited about that movie. It was so good.
Grooted. Wow.
Grounded, friend.
Grounded. Yeah. I'm never gonna say that word right. Like, I'm always gonna doubt myself now. Thanks. So the whole idea of it is grounded in sort of this Manichaean philosophy of good versus evil, that they are mutually exclusive. There's no real compromise between the two. For good to win, it has to overcome evil.
Right.
So that's and in Star Wars, that is definitely true. We see a lot of, like, every Sith has been a bad guy.
Right.
And every Jedi has, for the most part, been a good guy. We, like, if you don't have a red lightsaber,
you're pretty much
a good guy.
Yeah, you're considered a good guy. Yeah. And you may slip here and there. Or Anakin makes the fall.
Well, he makes the fall into tragedy and becomes a Sith.
Yeah, but everybody else seems to have pretty good, clear, good guy intentions.
Yeah. So there's no real room for being neutral or balanced. To be neutral is also to let evil win. Is even sort of like, even with what they kind of did with the Bendu, neutrality isn't right in the galaxy.
Yeah.
It's inactivity. It's letting evil grow. So we have a lot of that right now with the Star Wars universe, and this author, Sarah Dempster, really kind of boils down the Sith to being selfish and the Jedi to being selfless. And there's no room for being both. You can't strive to be selfless and selfish at the same time. Which I think is another interesting point to kind of debate, and we'll get to that. About.
Yeah, we talked about that last week. A little bit.
Exactly. And that also that naturally that using the dark side and coming to it will come at a cost, and that it's a slippery slope to get into it. That you have to divorce attachments. That there's nothing good about anything in the Sith. That it is all bad, and that everything that the Jedi strive to be, even if they get caught up in they may have gotten caught up in the dogma of the Jedi Code, but it's still an effort to strive towards good.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So that's the best recap I can give of the article.
Which is great.
The article's definitely worth the read. It's
really
very
good. Yeah, very well written, very well thought out. Big props to Sarah over there at 1138. I do have here's my initial thoughts on it. From a certain point of view, she's absolutely correct. From a very simplistic, this is what we've seen so far in Star Wars. We've seen a very good guy versus bad guy. We've seen a very light versus dark, heavy influenced version of the story. She's right. She's absolutely right. Like, there isn't any room for that. However, where I kind of draw the line on that is however, this is also a galaxy, a big galaxy. We're being introduced to other Force users, other Force ideas and philosophies. You have to kind of start making room now for more than just these two extreme positions. You have to make room for this dualistic thinking. You have to be able to see more along a complicated line of thinking. Like, this is a very 1 inch deep, 1 mile wide philosophy of how good and evil work, or how the universe works. And to be honest with you, it's a very American Christian idea of how religion works.
Right.
You know, I grew up believing very much similar philosophies, very similar idea of like, well, you know, God is good and Satan is bad, and that settles it. Like, there isn't anything else to really talk about. Like,
well, it's interesting because, you know, Star Wars fans are also aware that Lucas did kind of draw on some sort of Zen, you know, some Buddhist ideals, especially in Empire Strikes Back, when he introduced the idea of the Force. It's not exclusive. Like, it's sort of a little bit of a clumsy melding of Western and Eastern ideals. Mm-hmm. But it definitely feels like the Western ideal is kind of over, like, taken control of most of it. Maybe because it's come from
a Western civilization.
Yeah, it's come from a Western perspective. We haven't had really any, like, Eastern artists necessarily, you know, really kind of participate and create a Star Wars movie. It'd be interesting to see if you had, like, an Asian director, a Chinese director, you know, or a Korean director to, like, actually kind of, like, try to make a Star Wars movie and see what, like, the difference in their version of the Force and the spirituality in it.
That would be really fascinating. I would totally dig that.
Yeah.
That would be great. That would be great. Well, I think we're going to kind of get there, I think, in this discussion of like, all right, how does it really work? Because I don't think that, you know, you can ultimately just have two powers fighting it out in a universe. Like, it just doesn't make sense after a while. Because I think I saw a video earlier today. It was Neil deGrasse Tyson talking to Chelsea Handler on her show, and she asked him, do you believe in God? And, you know, she finally was able to corner him down to like, well, you can't have a God that is all powerful in this universe and a God that is all good in this universe at the same time, that allows bad things to happen. Like, those two things don't make sense when you think about it, when you draw it out to its natural conclusion. In his mind, I mean, I think that there's an argument that can be made that, God can still be good and bad things can still happen.
Well, especially if you add the freedom of choice in it.
Yeah, and not only and freedom of choice, and you know, if this is just a temporary thing, then, you know, it's like, well, I let my kid fall down and scrape her knee, and does that make me a bad parent? No, that just, it happens. Like, it's just sort of a natural consequence of being alive.
Well, and I think that's an interesting thing to bring up right there, because, like, inherently, like, you judge that action by itself, that seems like a pretty bad thing, but you know, as a parent, that you also have to let, you know, hurt and harm sometimes come to your child so that they learn. But you also prevent them from certain things just because.
I don't let her play in traffic. I don't let her play in traffic, but, you know, just she falls down and scrapes her knee. Like, it's kind of like that's what happens. But, you know, if you're looking at life, quote unquote, from an eternal view of like, this is just like 60, 80 years on, you know, in an eternity. Like, what happens in these 60 to 80 years is almost inconsequential, really, when you think about it. I mean, unless, you know, but then you put all the baggage on it of like, well, whatever you decide in these 60, 80 years determines whether or not you're going to live in that millennium or that eternity. Now it becomes consequential, but like what actually happens to you is almost irrelevant. Because it's just a blip it's a bump on the road to eternity. So, which is why I have a sort of a conflict with a lot of Christians who are like so upset about like what's going to happen, you know, like what happens if the world ends, or like if you really believe that when the world ends you're going to heaven, or when you die you're going to heaven, like what are you holding on to? Like, what are you fighting to be
attachment.
Here? Yeah, it is attachment. And so, you know, that whole idea, that whole line of questioning and that whole line of thinking, like when you have just simple dualistic thinking, and you and I know, you know, like we're both libertarian, and we see this like in politics too, of like when there's only Republican line of thinking and there's only Democrat line of thinking, and there's that line in the sand and the two shall never meet and shall never compromise because both sides are wrong, and you have this dualistic thinking. Nothing good comes of that.
Right.
Nothing good comes of dualistic thinking. Like that whole, like we've been down that road a dozen times, and you can point out, you know, from religion to politics to, you know, raising kids. Right. Like when once you draw lines in the sand like that, and you have to in certain instances, obviously the life is very complicated. But I think that's where the idea of the Gray Jedi comes into play.
And I think you can bring that idea back to Star Wars. In fact, I think Ryan actually kind of says it pretty well. It's like the lack of compromise between both Jedi and Sith led to some pretty messed up stuff happening in the galaxy. So thank you for that, Ryan.
Yeah, and he's absolutely right.
So
he nailed it.
Because of that duality. So you can there's the idea introduced in the prequels, and I know some people have a problem with this idea,
but they're canon.
Yeah, it's canon now. Well, but I think this specific idea of the prophecy and the idea of balance coming to the Force has really kind of influenced a lot of where Star Wars.
Because what does balance mean?
Right, and is that balance? I think there's a couple places to debate this. You can talk about balance on sort of a cosmic scale with, like how many Jedi do you have versus how many Sith do you have?
Like a purely number issue?
Or just the existence of both orders, or is it about an individual thing? So this is the thing. My issue with where Sarah's kind of grounded this her argument is, again, that it is grounded in a very Western ideal.
Right.
With that like more Taoist ideal of yin and yang, you do have the existence of both fuels each other's power and intensifies each other. And I think that's where I do think Star Wars could be headed in that direction, just based on like kind of the different Force orders that have been coming out and some of the discussions.
Well, you've certainly seen it in the Bendu.
Exactly.
It was neither Jedi nor Sith, and was very like adamant about I am the one in the middle,
right, and being about the balance, being that point.
And I know like there were some people that criticized. He's like, well, then once the Bendu was finally forcing it in, he was just sort of like this reckless reckless force of nature, but didn't just take shots at the Jedi, and he was just like, get off my effing planet. I want some peace. Being in the middle doesn't mean that you're all like you're neutral. In all ways. It means that you can take a stand for something. It just doesn't mean that you're completely committed to the dualistic thinking of this is good, this is evil.
And I think for me, the Gray Jedi is kind of embodied in sort of that Ecclesiastes type ideal of like there is a time for war and a time for peace.
Right.
So, and if that's the case, because I think like you can look through history and you can see that there are times to stand up for righteousness, but there are also times for peace. Like obviously you're not gonna. I forget the name of the French ambassador who kind of like made the deal to kind of like let Hitler kind of have his way. I know Hitler is like the go-to evil
the
guy.
Week in a row we bring up Hitler.
It's the easiest go-to evil guy.
He's not even the most evil guy, but go ahead.
I know, but it's the one that everyone can kind of commonly go with. But like, the neutrality in that case opened the door for him, where like it's hard to argue that you shouldn't stand up against Hitler, No,
absolutely. In the face of ultimate evil, you absolutely stand up to Hitler. However,
but in the case of like Gandhi versus the British Empire, pacifism combined with some other elements that made that stand, like that is also the right choice. So there's a time for everything.
Right. There's a time for everything. And then going back to your idea. And I completely agree with that. I think life is far more complicated. I think people are far more complicated. To say that we are just one thing is such a narrow-minded view of how reality and how life works. To say that you're either selfish or you're selfless.
And that's an interesting thing. So how, I have my thoughts on this, but how do you kind of rationalize, how can you be both? How can you be selfless and selfish and still be good?
Well, I guess it depends on your definition of good. Mm-hmm. First of all,
and still walk the right path, I guess.
The middle way. Well, I can be I'm a selfish person. I do things and I say things that make me feel good, and I will cut people off in traffic, and I will do stupid things and say dumb things, and that you would not attribute to a good person, right? Of like, well, he's like, if that was all you were weighing my life on, you would say, well, he's a dick, right?
Well,
for this conversation, all right, go with me on this, Addy.
I'm just saying, if you're going to put that ideal out,
you would say this
are.
no matter what, and it would be a fair assessment. It would be a fair assessment. I'm not denying.
I'm just saying that description of Qui-Gon from that comic where they were saying like, oh, he goes his own way, and he will fiercely never admit that he's wrong on anything. I was like, wow, Qui-Gon is Ben.
I am. I love Qui-Gon, man. He's the best Jedi. He really is. He died way too soon. But then on the other hand, I can also do things like foster care. I can take care of my kids. I can take care of my wife. I can take care of my family. I can do things that people consider good. I can be very charitable. I can do much good in this world. That if you just weighed me alone on those attributes, people would say I'm a saint, of which I've been accused of. And I'm like, no. I'm a bit of a dick.
Yep.
I'm kind of a dick saint. I'm the saint of dicks. But
I think you're in the middle. You're more of a Ben do.
I'm a Ben do.
That was so painful. I had to do it.
I liked it though.
I know.
I'm not against it. And maybe I should start wearing antlers. That'd be kind of fun. So people are complicated. It's not as simple as he does good, he does bad. Like I said this last week, and I kind of regretted it as I was saying it. So I'm going to say it again this week. I'm sure that if we were able to zoom into a more micro level of Hitler's life and the people who knew Hitler personally,
like his dog, maybe, some of his friends, I'm sure he had friends at some point in time in his life and stuff like that, who there were attributes of Hitler that they liked, because it's very driven.
He wasn't a great artist, but he tried hard, the guys who were in the foxhole with him in World War I and stuff like that. I'm sure there were, where I'm going with this, right?
I know.
You're just trying to make me look
I know,
like
I'm just waiting for the soundbite that's going to incriminate us forever and kill this podcast.
Yeah.
I'm just like, oh no, don't say it.
So I'm sure that somewhere along the line, there were people who, it's very easy to go, well, that's the epitome of evil.
Right.
Yes, absolutely. From a macro level, looking at what his entire life was about, absolutely horrible human being. On a micro level, I wonder if that was always the case, and I doubt that it was always the case. I'm sure Eva Braun found something appealing about him, if it was just power or if there was more to it than that. There was something appealing about this guy on a private level as well. And we all have that to varying degrees. I'm not just saying by any stretch of the imagination that Hitler was probably a pretty decent guy or whatever. That's not what I'm saying.
That's the soundbite.
Yeah, exactly. That's the one that's going to get us down. But I am saying that we all have this duality in us. So to say that from a philosophical idea of Jedi versus Sith, you're one or the other, that just doesn't match up with reality and what we know existence to be. So it can't be that. There has to be other ways.
Well, I kind of look at, coming back to the selfless versus selfishness, I kind of look at this also from a cultural viewpoint.
Okay.
So, Western culture definitely very individualistic. You're intended, when you get out of high school, it's kind of assumed that you're gonna move out, go on your own. It's all about the achievement that you can make on your own, make it your own name. That's kind of the priority. Whereas in Eastern cultures, in the Indian community, it's definitely about your family name and your family honor and all of that. So there's it's very easy coming from growing up in the West to look at the Eastern cultures and say, oh my God, think about all the horrible things they do in the name of the community and hurt individuals. Right. But you also have to look at sometimes that family community, especially later in life, is very valuable for how it helps grow everyone together, and sometimes they're often there to even take care of each other when the individual falls. So there's
a balance to it.
Yeah. The thing is, sometimes there's absolutely negative too, where in my own family experience, where someone was a dishonor to the family, and specifically there was a divorce in our family, and we were kicked out of the community.
Right.
So that. So you have the bad there, but you also have the loneliness in sort of Western culture of making your own path, and sometimes if you need help, you don't always get it. So I think that comes to that similar to that selflessness versus selfishness. It is a selfless thing to make that in that collectivistic culture, and there can be a negative aspect to it because you are so concerned on the needs or the benefit for the community, for the greater good of the community. Sometimes an individual
to trample the individual.
Exactly, but then on the flip side of that, the individual prioritizing themselves so heavily is also can be negative.
Right.
When they prioritize their needs over the needs of the many as well. So there's I think there is, when you look at it from a bigger perspective, there is definitely a room for the Gray Jedi and a room for selfishness to be good. For someone to have that drive to have some individual achievement and
great
expression.
individual, right?
Exactly. But then at the same time, that to do things in the interest of the community is a selfless and a good thing to do. So there is, if you're leaving it as the surface definition of what being selfless and being selfish is, yes, absolutely, it's light and dark, it's Jedi and Sith,
it's Republican Democrat.
It's the very easy interpretation that we've seen so far, but I think if you do delve into this idea a little further, I think you can find some interesting things. Let's take a look actually at the Jedi Code.
Okay.
And let's actually kind of like look at this and see like where this is good and where this is bad, and then we'll also take a look at the Sith Code and kind of look at where this is good and this is bad.
Okay.
I think that kind of continues.
Break down the Jedi first.
Yeah. Okay. So this is just like I know that there's more to it, but this is sort of like the basic code for the Jedi. And there is no emotion, there is peace. There is no ignorance, there is knowledge. There is no passion, there is serenity. There is no chaos, there is harmony. There is no death, there is the Force. Sith Code says, peace is a lie, there is only passion. Through passion I gain strength. Through strength I gain power. Through power I gain victory. Through victory my chains are broken, and the Force shall free me.
Okay.
So
let's go with the Jedi first.
Yeah, very easy to look at that and say, all right, well, Jedi are good and Sith are bad.
Yeah. From a surface level, like first grader, just learning about philosophy. Yeah, absolutely. Listen to an interesting podcast today. Listen to Rob Bell's podcast today, and he's got a new book coming out about the Bible. Yeah. And interpreting how to read it and what it really means, stuff like that. And I thought it was really fascinating. He pointed out something that I had never really thought about before, and this applies to the Sith Code. He said, it's very easy to read a book like Judges and read like, oh God, like this is just a bunch of violence and warring and like barbaric behavior. And if you read it just in pieces and you just read these little snippets of it in pieces, that's the impression that you get. But if you read it in its totality as a whole and then look at the lesson that's being learned as a whole in the book of Judges, you come to see that all this violence stems out of being repressed, and it's a rage against the machine of being enslaved and stuff like that. But and that this violence begets freedom, which begets more violence, and it's a cycle. And the cycle of violence is shown throughout the book of Judges and what happens. But if you just look at it from like a very like snippet standpoint, you go, oh well, this is just stupid. Like I don't want to read anything violent. I'm too. We're way past that as a human. Right. But it's showing us more of an important lesson than that. And I think that you can interpret the Sith Code in a similar way of like, look, there's a cycle of violence to being repressed. Like the whole Sith Code is talking about becoming free. Right. The end goal is to be free, which means that they were repressed. There's talk about being chained and enslaved and all this stuff. Well, your natural reaction, the right reaction is to rage against that, to fight against that. There's ways to do it, and you can do it violently or you can do it non-violently, but you're still raging against that machine. Like right. You're still raging against being enslaved. And I think that, if you really wanted to take a deep dive on this, like the Sith Code could be interpreted as being a natural reaction and a natural causation to being enslaved and to the desire to be free. I think you can also look at it, and this is where I've always kind of felt that there was room. This is the word passion being associated with the dark side has always been something that I've always thought, like, that's why there's room for the Gray Jedi in Star Wars, and for them to, for there to be good from channeling the dark side. Because I think the idea of like not having passion sounds like you should have passion in what you endeavor to do. Relying purely on passion, it should be passion and discipline married together. Like, being purely disciplined with no passion for what you're doing sounds like a pretty bad life. Like, you should have some passion to guide you and still be able to achieve certain things. Like,
by, from passion you get strength, and then you get power, and then you get victory. Sure, like just pursuing power for the sake of power is bad. Like there's, I don't think there's a whole lot of compromise. I'm not really going to try to make a case for like just achieving power, but achieving victory in a certain realm. Like, you see athletes, guided by both discipline and passion to get where they go to strive for great goals.
Yeah.
Like that's something we always, like when I'm watching sports, and I'm watching an inspirational story of someone who, like in the Olympics or, in any sport, like that's an encouraging thing to see about someone.
I've never seen anybody great who was dispassionate about what they do.
Exactly.
It's just never happened.
Right.
It's impossible.
And that's where I kind of see that there's room for, sort of a middle way with this sort of this idea of channeling a little bit of the dark side. Because yes, passion can absolutely lead you to some places that you shouldn't. Passion undisciplined absolutely can lead you there. Let's flip over to the Jedi Code. This idea of like, sure, no emotion, there is peace. And absolutely, peace is something you want to attain, but sometimes peace for oneself and not having emotion for another, like there's lack of empathy. And I think that's something we kind of saw with the prequel Jedi Order, this very dogmatic version of them that didn't have empathy for the rest of the galaxy. And I think that's the flip side of not having attachment and not having passion and pursuing sort of serenity, sort of this monk mountain, living in an ivory tower or in a monastery, completely unattached from the rest of the world, also lets you live out an existence that doesn't affect people in a positive way. So I think there's absolutely a negative to when you're looking at sort of the Jedi Code.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I see, and I guess this is just because of the kind of person that I am. Like, I see way more negative to the Jedi Code than I do the Sith Code.
Ooh, Darksider.
I guess so.
Glad I got you that red saber.
It all makes sense now. But I because of the reasons like you just described, like it seems like it's so detached from reality, and so cold that it doesn't do good.
Right.
It doesn't do the things that it says it wants to do.
Now, then there's the flip side of that. Like, is now, like, looking at the Jedi Code, is this something that is about sort of an inward harmony as opposed to sort of an outward relation issue? Or, like, can this be two separate issues? Do we have some new comments?
Gee, Ryan wrote War and Peace to us. I'll have to read this in a little bit. Good Lord, man.
We just need to have Ryan on at some point when you're back in town, buddy.
Yeah, come on back, man. We'd love to have you on the show. He says Luke has an understanding, assuming that he remained in communication with his father and mentors, that just like he was led to believe with the Sith, the Jedi left unchecked were no different in their narrow-mindedness. The unwillingness to see other points of views led to a toxic environment ripe for corruption. In ROTS, the fact of the matter is that the Jedi Order is a small religious sect with superpowers that led an attempted coup on a democratic Senate, regardless of how misguided the Senate may have been. There was no Senate at that point, man. The Senate had been disbanded. Palpatine is the Senate. For the good guys to do something like that, instead of using proper channels on the law, etc., is a rather dark path. Shows that they were more than willing to embrace a gray if it suited their purpose.
Well, you said in Revenge of the Sith. Yeah, there was still a Senate then.
Revenge of the Sith?
Yeah, the Senate didn't get disbanded until A New Hope, buddy.
Okay.
What kind of Star Wars fan are you?
No, not.
No, I'm kidding.
Well, no, I guess. Yeah. I mean, they were going to stop a Sith. I don't think that they were going to overthrow the government.
Yeah, they were. They were attempting a coup.
Okay, that's an interesting...
You didn't think they were?
No, I never really looked at it as a coup, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's definitely a coup. I mean, like, they're going there with sabers. They're intending
They're
to
going
fight.
there to stop a Sith. And there is a discussion between Anakin and Mace whether or not they should kill him or arrest him. Now, admittedly, Anakin's on the right side. Anakin's on the right side of this argument. Admittedly, but there is some debate.
Mace is going to kill. I mean, it's Samuel L. Jackson. You know he's going to kill.
To be fair, 4 of his Jedi buddies just got killed.
Right.
Like, my temperature might be a little
He was still
rise.
going with the intent to kill. Unless there was a big Kahuna burger, it would have only delayed him.
That is a tasty burger. I don't know. Maybe the Return of the Jedi does rock. You're right, Janine. I don't know. I think that I never really thought of it as a coup.
Yeah, no, it's definitely
I need to go back
coup.
and watch it and see if that's how it feels.
That's a little bit. It makes it a little bit more interesting there for a second.
They're like, no, screw it, we're taking over.
Well, I mean, they're going to take down the Chancellor.
Yes, they're going to take down the Chancellor,
He's
but
a
they're
Sith,
but they're not there to replace the government.
Well, what do you think was going to replace the government?
Well, I think that they would open it back up to an elected position.
It's still a violent rebellion to overthrow a dictator. Like when you go and assassinate or kill a violent dictator, it's still a coup.
I guess you're right. I guess it is a coup.
Yeah.
I stand correct. I learned something new today. Never thought of it as a coup.
No, this changes everything.
It changes everything. I got to rethink my entire position about everything.
You know, I forget the Gray Jedi. And that's it for this episode. Where does that leave us?
Well, you were talking about the Jedi Code.
Yeah. So yes, and we were talking about how its detachment is, and it can lead to sort of an apathy for the human experience and for human suffering. Product placement, really, Ben?
It's not. I'm drinking. I'm an alcoholic. What am I going to do? There's your other quote for the
yeah, that's for our next promo.
Yeah, forget Hitler. I'm an alcoholic.
Yeah, I still think that there is definitely room for Gray Jedi in the new lore. And I think there is still...
Not only do I think that there's room for it, I think it's almost a necessity.
Yeah. I think it can still be still a surface level, still something that's accessible for 12-year-olds, since it is Star Wars. It's still designed. It's a fairy tale for kids, and it's something that adults can enjoy too.
Kind of like church.
Wrong with that.
Did I say that?
I'm not going anywhere with that one.
Well, yeah, I agree. I think that the majority of the Star Wars stories are going to revolve, kind of like how our culture, the majority of our lives revolve around dualistic thinking. I think that that's going to be there, and I think that's going to be the majority of it. However, I think that we're going to start to get stories. We're going to get more things like Bendu. We're going to get more things that kind of lead to the other ideas, other paths, other uses of the Force, other philosophies of the Force that are going to not fit into those two dogmatic ideas, the two opposing ideas, that there is going to be other ways.
And I think while there will still be that surface level, still like you can still interpret Star Wars lore in its dualistic form. I think there will still be the seeds for that discussion, because you still have the seeds for that discussion even in Christianity and any other religion for that matter.
Yeah, you really do, and it would be better if we had more of those discussions, honestly.
Right.
Like in real life, I think it makes for a better world. I don't know that it makes for better storytelling in Star Wars to have too much of that, though.
To have too much of the duality of but I think again we're starting to see that there's the seeds for more discussion, but not necessarily a conclusive like the Gray Jedi is going to be the way.
Order,
because you still have to come up with villains that are compelling for who.
Like,
what's a compelling villain?
The orange Sith, then what's the opposite of gray? Like,
well, I mean, do you then go into like Lantern territory with like different orders that have?
Yeah.
Because I think that's also an interesting idea, especially because that's one of the things I do like about Jeff Johns' run on Green Lantern. I know we're going into another franchise,
let's keep going.
But with the idea of will without any sort of emotion, it's without any sort of love and hope and without all of these other things, it can be misguided, but like love by itself can be very
damaging.
Yeah, like
very damaging.
Well, because you can see people, will commit crimes out of love, but they will also do great things for each other out of love. You have on the other end of that spectrum, you have the idea of rage, and there's that sort of righteous anger versus the uncontrollable, rage that does terrible things too. So like there is
a duality in everything.
Right, exactly. So I think that's where you could always take this story into that kind of territory. I know you got the rainbow spectrum of Lantern Corps. Maybe that's something that sort of makes its way into Star Wars as we continue the saga. Like as far as other villains and the nature of these villains, it could be a very interesting way to explore the nature of the Force.
And the nature of reality, because that's really what you're describing when you're talking about the Force. You know, like the way Yoda describes it, of, you know, it's in us, it surrounds us. It, you know, luminous beings are we, not this, you know, crude matter. Yeah, like he's describing this is reality, which in a lot of ways is what we're talking about when we talk about God. You know, we're trying to find words. We're trying to find an explanation, the ultimate explanation for reality of what is this all about, and you know, the Force is that thing, and the question that now becomes, what is the nature of the Force and how does it work in the universe? And so, yeah, I think that there's a lot of really cool, creative ways that you can totally do that, and totally do that with keeping it interesting, but not without watering down what Star Wars is. Like, at the end of the day, like, it's still Star Wars. Like, it still has to be.
So we gotta have the red lightsabers with the bad guys.
Yeah, I mean,
you
like,
don't think we can have purple
Western
lightsabers or
yeah, you can throw it in here and there, but it can't be. I don't think it can be a majority of your story.
Yeah,
not without fundamentally changing
the nature of Star Wars.
The nature of Star Wars.
Well, Rian Johnson's talked about it. The fundamental nature of the Force might be changed with his new story. So who knows?
I think we'll be pleasantly surprised if it is.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. And I know he said, like, you know, that we're going to get training, but it's going to surprise us on how it works. And I think that's just like
that's just hype.
No, I think, like, instead we're going to see Sith training instead of Jedi training. Like, we're not going to see a lot of, like, how does Luke train Rey? Like, we know how the Jedi
see how Kylo Ren's getting trained.
Yeah.
I'm actually kind of, I never thought about that, but I'm kind of interested.
Which now fundamentally changes the way we think about the Force, because you can do that training, you can go through that scenario and see how, well, you know what, there actually is some good point. You know, the Sith code, actually there is some legitimacy there. There is good reason in the way that it or how that dogma has been created.
Well, I agree with you that you can start exploring sort of the Sith and seeing good things from them if my theory of Ahsoka is Snoke. Hashtag Ahsoka. I've never
I love Ahsoka is the greatest thing I've ever heard.
It's the best hashtag.
Yeah.
It's the dumbest idea I've ever come up with. I just like throwing out a Snoka.
Hashtag Ahsoka is really fantastic.
Well,
we need to get T-shirts made.
Snoka?
Yeah.
That show like all those terrible images of like, oh look at this scar on this random person.
Snoke's face, and look, you can see here, well, she's fighting Anakin in that pit.
Anyway, let us know what you think. Do you think there's room for the Gray Jedi in Star Wars? Do you think there should be a Gray Jedi in Star Wars? Do you think our ideals, even about the nature of morality, are completely unhinged? Let us know. You can comment on this page. You can comment on Facebook, wherever. All of that you can access by going to our website, certainpov.com. Don't forget, you can check out Weight Loss Civil War there, Patreon, sign up for our email list. All sorts of fun stuff is available there. Our website, certainpov.com. And until next week, stay scruffy, my nerf herders.
Thanks for listening to Certain Point of View. Don't miss an episode. Just subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on iTunes. Head over to certainpov.com.